Welcome, everybody, particularly to our witnesses on both panels, because I know you put a lot of work into preparation. And we thank everybody for their help. Before I give my opening statement for the topic of our hearing, I think we all take a moment yesterday and today and for a long time in the future, but I do it now on behalf of the committee, to offer our collective thoughts and prayers to the victims of the Las Vegas shooting and their families and their loved ones. As everyone is aware, yesterday more than 59 Americans lost their lives and more than 500 were injured. The carnage that occurred yesterday is truly heartbreaking. We're here today to consider how to address the issue created by President Obama's unconstitutional executive action, referred to as deferred action for childhood arrivals. We'll probably all use the acronym DACA. In September, President Trump gave 6 months to Congress to act in accordance with the Constitution on an issue that impacts millions of Americans and hundreds of thousands of unauthorized immigrants. We've been debating this issue for 16 years. What type of legal status, if any, that unauthorized immigrants who were brought here as children should have. Since 2001, successive Congresses have considered this question and did not address it. In both 2007 and 2013, Congress considered what we call comprehensive immigration reform that would have legalized millions of unauthorized individuals. However, these efforts at mass amnesty failed. The reason is simple. Remembering what happened in 1986, the American people recognized that legalization without enforcement and a way to address increased demand for cheap foreign labor would only continue a cycle of unauthorized immigration. That's why for years Congress, in a bipartisan fashion, worked together to strengthen our nation's border security and interior enforcement, but has struggled to address some of the thorniest elements of immigration. Nothing better highlights Congress' bipartisan commitment to prevent illegal immigration than the Secure Fence Act. That bill authorized the government to construct 700 miles of fencing along the border. It passed with overwhelming bipartisan support, including from then Senators Obama, Biden, Clinton, and even our ranking member, Ms. Feinstein. As President George W. Bush said, that bill was, quote, an important step towards immigration reform, end of quote. Why? Because the Secured Fence Act was an effort to restore people's trust in the integrity of lawful immigration system by taking the real steps to have border security. As recently as 2010, both Democrats and Republicans agreed that the only constitutional action that could be taken was for Congress to act. President Obama himself summed it up best when he said he, quote, wasn't a king, end of quote, and was, quote again, obliged to execute the law and can't just make the laws himself, end of quote. To paraphrase novelist T.H. White, a king President Obama was not, but a king he decided to be. In June 15, 2012, he decided to bypass the Constitution and use his words, pen and phone, to create DACA, a large-scale executive action for hundreds of thousands of unauthorized immigrants. Not only did President Obama abuse prosecutorial discretion by staying deportation for these cases, he also allowed recipients to apply for work permit, and they did in hundreds of thousands. Since 2012, Citizenship and Immigration Services has issued more than 1.7 million work permits to DACA recipients. Granting these permits was a clear violation of law and of the Constitution. From the beginning, President Obama's executive action was riddled with numerous loopholes that allowed fraud and abuse. Since 2012, victims and whistleblowers have contacted me to expose how even criminal elements benefited from the program. Thanks to the courage of these whistleblowers and victims, I, along with several of my colleagues, sent over a dozen letters to the Obama administration about the program's vulnerability to exploitation and abuse. In one such case, a DACA recipient was granted a work authorization despite being under investigation by Homeland Security investigation for child exploitation. After receiving his work permit, the beneficiary was hired by a summer camp in California, where he was eventually arrested for distributing and possessing hundreds of pages of child pornography and for molesting a child in care. Although considered to be quote unquote potentially egregious public safety, end of quote, months before his arrest, he was nonetheless given a work permit. Whistleblowers also reported how once eligible beneficiaries could fraudulently continue employment once their DACA permit was terminated. Although work authorizations are valid after benefits are discontinued, a recipient could work until the work document itself expires, unless the employer is aware of the termination. But in spite of this clear abuse of power and the multiple examples of fraud in the program, we were at least comforted that President Obama's assurances that, quote unquote, this is not, well, quote, this is not amnesty, this is not a path to citizenship, end of quote, even this assurance was untrue. Preliminary data released to my office from Citizenship and Immigration Services indicates that by the time the Trump administration made its announcement on DACA, almost 40,000 beneficiaries had been adjusted to lawful permanent resident status and were on a path to citizenship. It's clear that from the beginning, President Obama's program, while not ill-intentioned, never operated in the way it was supposed to. Worst of all, the program created a false sense of hope about and among DACA beneficiaries. Thousands of them, in reliance on President Obama's ill-conceived pen and phone promises, started working jobs, pursuing education, making steps towards productive contribution to American society. And after all said and done, that's all at risk. On September the 5th this year, Attorney General Sessions announced the President had decided to rescind the Obama program. In reaching this decision, General Sessions acknowledged that many of us had known all along, that DACA was plain and simple and unconstitutional exercise authority by the executive branch. We all have empathy for young people who came here through no fault of their own. And for many of them, America is the only country they know. And the administration isn't without empathy. In renegotiating the fact that almost 700,000 young people relied on false promises of the previous administration, this administration didn't immediately terminate the program. Instead, they created a 6-month wind down and allowed anyone who currently has DACA to keep their work authorization until 2 years after DACA status expires. This wind down is simple: to get this Congress a chance to adopt a constitutional long-term solution. So here we are today, almost a month after the administration's announcement, and now's the time to start considering a path towards consensus in earnest. First and foremost, any potential DACA agreement has to include robust border security, and by that I don't mean a wall. Of course, tactical infrastructure like fencing is a part of the answer, But border security is more than that. Border security is kind of all of the above approach, including fencing, technology, funding for more law enforcement personnel and equipment, changes to substantive laws so that catch and release and other misguided policies are ended, and we need to require that the administration finally complete the biometric entry and exit system that Congress has continually demanded and allocated money for over the last 15 years, not anything of consequence being done. Second, and equally as important, for robust border security, we've got to make sure that any deal includes meaningful interior enforcement. The simplest, most common sense may be to ensure that we eliminate the root causes of undocumented immigration, to make it the E-Verify system mandatory for all employers. This system helps employers confirm that job applicants are here legally. I know that this is a controversial and difficult step, and some big corporate interests are going to object, but we know that jobs are the #1 reason people come here. But E-Verify isn't the only answer. We also need to make it easier for law enforcement to deport gang members, dangerous felons, sex offenders, and human traffickers. We need to fix the Zadvydas decision that requires us to release dangerous criminal elements. Finally, we need to take a hard look at our asylum and immigration court backlogs and take steps to ensure speedy deportation for those who deserve it while preserving lawful claims for those truly in need. It would be a dereliction of our duty if we fail to take steps to end at least some of the illegal immigration that we know it, as we know it, and kick the can down the road so that future Congresses has to address this very serious problem again in another 15 years. I'm confident that if everybody is reasonable, we can reach a solution. And so we are here for this hearing today, and the first panel is composed of government witnesses, and I hope they will be able to provide some insight into what measures the Trump administration thinks we should take to secure the border and the homeland in the process of helping DACA kids. I know the administration is currently engaged in ongoing litigation, and witnesses may be restricted in some questions they can answer. I can appreciate that, and I hope my colleagues will do the same. However, to the extent questions can be answered and guidance can be given, we should expect forthrightness.